Hi, I'm Mark Castell, founder of AEI Speakers Bureau, and welcome to Chapter 1 of the Education Avengers, Champions of Virtual Learning. Today we have three superhero teachers who will help your school succeed with distance instruction. We're all very excited with the first program and hope to deliver some great content now and in the future. Each of our trainers will be available to answer a few questions at the end of their presentation, so please type in your questions into the chat as we move along. Rick Wormley will close the program. He's an experienced educator who now writes professional articles and education books while training teachers, principals, superintendents, school boards, and parents. Rick will speak on grading and assessment for remote learning. Katie McKnight will be second. She's the author of 20 books and the founder of an education company built around her successful literacy and learning center model. Her presentation is on developing reading and literacy in an e-learning context. Our first presenter was an at-risk youth and college dropout turned award-winning Harvard educator who will speak on tips and techniques for virtual teaching. Please welcome Brandon Fleming.
Hello, everyone. So good to see you virtually. Again, my name is Brandon Fleming. I am the assistant debate coach at Harvard University, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of the Harvard Diversity Project. There's absolutely no place that any of us would rather be than to be here with you right now. During these unprecedented, challenging times, there's nothing we would rather do than to engage and share with educators, and no place we would rather be than here. Maybe on a beach somewhere, maybe on the Amalfi Coast or something like that, but the likelihood of that is very slim. And so we're grateful to be able to share this time with you, to be able to impart some knowledge and share some resources during this time. And honestly, even though we're operating under the moniker of being the Education Avengers, you are the true superheroes. All of us are. There's been no time other than now, where people have really come to understand the true value of education and the true value of educators and your contributions to this field. And I really want to take the time to help us understand why we're here and the importance of our being here and sharing the information that we plan to share with you today. And it is because, quite honestly, right now, people, we are on the front lines of a revolution here. And how we respond as educators will have an immeasurable impact, not just on the future of education, but on the future of society. And the reason is because every single person comes through us. We are the ones, we are the cultivators of the next thinkers and doers in society. Just think about that. Like, what other industry can truly say that aside from the field of education? Our responsibility and the magnitude of that is so great. And it's important that we take the time to talk about how we can be efficient in the work that we do. And I'm so grateful that you're here, because the unfortunate part is that right now, today, there are so many, not just teachers, but schools, entire schools, who have, quite frankly, given up because they don't feel like they are adequately equipped to be able to run this virtual race. But we're so glad that that's not you, because you are here. You are here and you are seeking out the necessary tools and the necessary resources and the necessary training to make sure that you do this work efficiently in these challenging and unprecedented times. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about tips and techniques for virtual training. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to explore it in two different ways. We're going to explore the socio-emotional, and we're also going to explore the pedagogical. We'll talk about exactly what that means in a second. But before we delve into that, I want to share something with you, and that is a portion of my story and my journey. I used to be what I'm showing on the screen right now is a picture of me growing up. And one of the things that I share with people often is that, I used to teach both at risk and gifted students. And the reason why I've been successful in doing that is because at two different points of my life, I have been both. And the reason why I want to share this with you is because it ties directly into the best practices that I'm going to share with you in just a few moments. If you imagine the worst student you've ever seen in your classroom, that was me. I was the kid who was disengaged. I was the kid who was unenthusiastic. I was a kid, quite honestly, that was difficult to reach. And I struggled immensely all throughout grade school. I struggled all throughout high school. The only thing that saved my life was basketball. It's what pulled me off of the streets. I grew up in New York City, in the Washington, D.C. area, and I got involved with gangs, and I got involved with drugs, and I got involved with violence. But my coaches poured a lot into me, and they showed me that I had a promising athletic career. And so I was on the straight and narrow only because of basketball toward the end of my high school career. And I went to play Division I basketball at Liberty University. And I get there to play in the Big South Conference. It's a dream come true. And all of a sudden, here I am in my freshman year, the first semester. And all of a sudden, we're in practice, and I go up for a dunk, and I tear my patellar tendon in my knee. And just like that, my career is over. And I subsequently became a dropout because I was never academically inclined. And so after spending 2 years working in a vitamin factory on the assembly line for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, it was the worst experience of my life. And that is when I came to understand the true value and power of education, because I saw it as the only way that I could escape. And so by a miracle, I was able to make it back to college. And here I am now in college with this ambition that I had never experienced before. And so now, I'm trying to make it in college with basically a middle school education level, because all of those years that I spent in school, I was passed along by teachers who never thought that I would amount to anything beyond athletics. And so now I'm in school. Funny thing, I actually chose English as a major for the sole reason that it sounded like it was going to be easy. I said, well, I speak English, so how difficult could it be? And so now I'm sitting in these classrooms, listening to these professors using all this sophisticated rhetoric and jargon, and they want me to read the Iliad and the Odyssey and Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor and all of this esoteric language that I don't know how to comprehend, and I struggled. And then I got caught cheating because that was the only way that I could survive. And my teacher, my professor at the time, she really poured into me, and she helped me understand I had a decision to make. And I made that decision. I sold my television, my PlayStation, every form of entertainment that I had, and I bought books. I bought this English set and taught myself how to read. And I graduated from reading level to reading level. And now all of a sudden, I started to really feel academically adept. And I joined the debate team at my school. And I started learning how to debate, and then I started teaching kids in the community how to debate, and it really transformed me, and I had to reinvent myself into a scholar. When I was doing that, I asked myself a question. I said, why is it that I didn't have this experience earlier in my academic career? Why is it that no teacher was able to incite curiosity while I was sitting in their classrooms? Why is it that no teacher was able to engage me in this way? And honestly, I was like, well, you know what? There's nothing I can do about my past, but there is something I can do about my future. And there's something I can do about the futures of others. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be an educator. And so here I am now, and I started teaching at-risk youth in my community, and I started introducing them to debate. And I'm going to revisit that later to tell you how you can implement this in your classroom and why it's so powerful and important for engagement. But that kind of takes me into what I want to share with you about socio-emotional learning. And when you talk about socio-emotional learning, as we explore this and the pedagogical, because in some ways they're isolated, but in many ways they're congruent. And the way I want to explore this with you today to talk about how you can implement it in your classroom and how you can be effective in your virtual classroom. There are three ways that we're going to explore this. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about challenges. We're going to identify problems and barriers that you've probably already experienced as we tried to pivot toward this virtual classroom, which is markedly different from the physical classroom. After we talk about challenges, because obviously that's not very productive to just talk about problems, I want to talk about philosophies. I want us to analyze frameworks and really understand what we're trying to accomplish here. And then that's when we're going to talk about solutions and talk about what are some tangible, technical, mechanical skills that you can implement in your virtual classroom to create an efficient learning environment. And so let's start with the socio-emotional. Now, this is really important, and I want to encourage you to look at this in a way that is quite atypical. The challenge here when it comes to socio-emotional learning is desire. It's desire. And the reason why that's very important, we have to talk about it, and it's not something that many people and educators talk about because everybody has to be at school. No, the kids really don't have a choice. So some tend to think that desire doesn't matter, but desire is critically important because you can't force someone to eat something that they don't have a taste for. And that's very important for us. And I want you to look at these quotes that I have on the screen when we talk about philosophies of desire. Theodore Roosevelt once said, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that's really important because here we're dealing with relationship. It's hard enough to develop a relationship in the physical classroom. How do you develop a relationship in a virtual classroom? What does that even look like? And that's something we need to unpack. There's another quote by Maya Angelou. It's one of my favorite, and I absolutely live by this. It says, people won't always remember what you say, but they'll always remember the way you make them feel. This is where I really want to push and challenge you as an educator. Because when it comes to your physical classroom, you have to ask yourself, how do students feel when they walk into my classroom? Not only that, but how do they feel when they exit? We have to ask ourselves the same thing virtually. How do they feel when they enter your virtual classroom? How do they feel when they exit your virtual classroom? Because that's ultimately going to determine what resonates and what does not. And the reason why this is important is because while this might not be important for some students, it is important for others. And it ties into this philosophy right here. There are two types of teachers who are going to approach education in two different ways. One is come to me, the other is go to them. Come to me is an approach that works for gifted students. We raise the bar high. We expect those gifted students to reach that standard. But that doesn't work for underperforming and average students. No, we have to go to them. We have to meet them where they are. And quite honestly, that's not unique to us as educators because there's literally no industry or agency that does not practice this philosophy. We have to craft the educational experience around the desires of our students, or in other words, our clients. Every company has to do it if they want to be efficient, and so do we as educators. The solution is connection, or what I call the vibe. If you create an environment where your children want to be there, that's half the battle. Because if they don't want to be there, then quite honestly, they're not going to want to learn. And so now that we've talked a little bit about the socio-emotional, and there's so much more to both of these points that we need to unpack. But unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time right now. And so I want to give these to you very quickly. I want to talk very quickly about the pedagogical or the instructional. And for this one, I want to use something a little bit more tangible, and that's a personal challenge that I have. So one of my roles with the university is that I've created this pipeline program where I take students who are considered underprivileged, minority students in Atlanta, and I train them to ensure that they are prepared to compete with students from 50 different countries around the world, the most gifted, top scholars, all around the world who converge on campus for several weeks of intensive study. Well, these students that I teach in Atlanta, they've never been exposed to higher level curricula in this way. And so I had to teach them subjects, the social sciences, such as philosophy and political science and sociology and psychology and all those higher level disciplines. But here's the challenge. All of my classes are 5 hours. Yeah, you imagine that. So think about how difficult it is to engage students in the classroom for 30 minutes. Now think about how difficult it is to engage students in the classroom for 5 hours. I want to tell you how I do it, and I want to tell you how I do it efficiently. It's through these philosophies that are on the board right now, or on the computer screen rather. Carter G. Woodson once said, "The mere imparting of information is not education. The effort must result in one's ability to think and do for himself." Remember what I said earlier. Our job as educators is not just to impart information. We are developing, we are cultivating, we are producing the world's next thinkers and doers. And so simply giving information is not enough. The educational experience is not one-dimensional. It's binary, it's collaborative. And so not just collaborating, I know we use that term from teacher to teacher, but we have to think about that term from teacher to student. What does a collaborative educational experience look like? How do we foster that in the classroom? This next one is very, very important. And if you don't remember anything else, I need you to remember this right here because it's so powerful. Learning is not transactional. Learning is experiential. What's the difference? It's information versus experimentation. This is why students tend to favor the math and science. Because everywhere I go when I talk to educators, I do this little survey, and I say, if you were to ask 500 students what their favorite subject is, what do you think are going to be the top two? And unquestionably, every single time it happens, it's math and science. Why? Because those two subjects are naturally hands-on. They're naturally experiential. They're naturally experimental. And so the question is, how do we create that same effect with the other courses, with the other subjects? That means that there's something in your ability to experiment that heightens the learning experience. And that is, one, it gives you an opportunity to own and be involved with your experience. And two, it leads you to that powerful moment of discovery. Think about it. Think about when you finally created something and you're able to step back and look at that masterpiece and say, wow, I did that. Well, you can do the same with ideas. When you create an idea and you step back and say, wow, I did that. When you share that idea with someone else who appreciates it and they contribute to it, and the next thing you know, as a class, you've created something beautiful. That can happen in your classroom. And it is more powerful than anything else I've ever seen. When I worked at the previous school that I was at before I went to Harvard, I had the privilege of training over 50,000 educators, and I taught them how to do songs to engage students. I taught them how to do chants to engage students. I taught them how to use games to engage students. But there's nothing that engages students more than creative conversations. And quite honestly, it's one of the only options that we have with the virtual classroom. And why is that so important? Because everyone loves to solve problems. No one wants to be lectured to. People want to be involved. No one wants to be talked to. People want to discover. The way we do that is through problem solving, creativity, and increasing proximity for the student so they can discover abilities that even they did not know that they had. I want to show you how to not only do this, but I want to show you how to explore the other issues that exist and the other problems that exist within the virtual classroom and how we can work together to solve them to make sure that the future of education and the future of our society does not suffer, because right now it is absolutely in the hands of you and me. And that is why educators are superheroes. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to pass it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Brandon. Please let me introduce our next champion who will speak on developing reading and literacy in e-learning context. Katie McKnight.
All right. Hi, everybody. Brandon, thank you so much. Of course, you couldn't see me, but I'm sitting there grinning and grinning and grinning, and just agreeing, with so much of what you were saying. And Rick and I were in the chat area chatting with some folks over there too. So thank you for that, because it fits in so well with what I'm going to discuss too. So we're going to look at it now, a lot of what Brandon had brought up. Now let's look at it with literacy, reading and literacy, and what it's going to look like in that e-learning context. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the NAEP data, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, that indicates that only 35% of our students nationwide are considered to be proficient readers in grades 3, 8, and 12. And proficient means grade level. And that's a pretty staggering statistic. I'll say that again, staggering statistic, because literacy skills are the foundation of everything in learning, and kids need to have those skills in reading and writing if they're going to be successful in answering questions and engaging in curious activities, as Brandon was talking about, and solving problems and questioning. So let's look at this, more. So I want to start with just a conversation about what really, is at the core of effective literacy instruction. And Dr. Richard Allington, one of our most key and important literacy researchers out there in the field, did a meta-analysis about 8 years ago, and it was published in Educational Leadership, and the title of the article was Every Child, Every Day. And he did a meta-analysis that looked at schools that had the greatest growth and student achievement. And he found, the first thing that he found was that they all had a very strong literacy plan. There was a strong foundation, and the literacy plan was, plan was shared with everybody. And everyone followed it. So there was a common understanding. And he found these 6 elements. So I want to share these with you, and then let's talk about what they look like in an e-learning environment. And the first is that every child listens to a fluent adult read aloud. All children, including our littles, as well as our big kids, our kids who are in AP Econ in 11th or 12th grade, they need to see adults read. We need to model that. And so for little guys, it's listening to a fluent adult read. But then for older kids, it's about a think aloud. So kids need to see how their science teacher reads a science article and can make sense of it. They need to see that in action and have those models. And then the next one is that every child reads something he or she chooses. And this doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean that it's the Wild West at all. What it means is that I always refer to it as a democratic dictatorship. So I'm going to give them choices within that corpus of content that they can read. So if I'm teaching, for instance, I'm thinking of my fellow English majors, Rick and Brandon, if I'm teaching about novels, all of us don't have to read the same novel. We can read different novels and still learn about text structures and all of those literary elements. And then every child talks with peers about reading and writing. And there's a significant body of research that those who talk the most, who speak the most in a learning environment, are the ones who actually learn the most. So when kids talk about their reading and writing, they get to those curious questions that Brandon was talking about. And we start avoiding that lecture because it's not that dynamic of really exploring text, exploring ideas. And that's what rich, engaged learning is all about. And then every child writes about something personally meaningful. And again, this doesn't mean that anything goes, that everything is just, out there. What it means is again, kids have choice within what they're studying. So to give you an example, if I'm teaching about the Bill of Rights in a U.S. history class, and I want to do an evidence-based argument, that's the assignment. I want the kids to work on that skill. And I invite them to choose one of the following amendments. and whether or not that amendment is still relevant in 2020. And it's interesting because whenever I do that with students in classrooms, they always pick about quartering of soldiers. They can't understand why quartering of soldiers is on the books, and they always pick that one. So again, they have choice. They're all writing about practicing the skill of evidence-based argument, but they have different pathways in, is what we're talking about. And then the other thing too is I know a lot of teachers who are doing this as well, is that, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and when kids write about their own stories, their own memoirs, how much more meaningful can that be, and making sense of what has happened right now. And I know some teachers who are doing that, and they're teaching about memoir and using it in comparison with other texts like the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, or the Diary of Anne Frank. So that's what we're talking about. That's the engagement, the curiosity, the pathway in. And then the fifth one that Allington found is that every child reads accurately. Now, again, that means something different for the little guys and then for the big guys. For the little guys, we're talking about decoding text. We're talking about letter sound recognition, phonic phonemic awareness. And then we're also talking about vocabulary, especially when we get into tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary. So if a student in a geography class comes across the word continent and reads it as content or content, they've got the initial, middle, and end sound correct, but they're still not decoding it correctly. And that's what we're talking about, is that rich vocabulary, because of course that also ties in with comprehension of text. And then every child reads something he or she understands. And there is some debate in the reading community. I want to say on record, and this is being recorded, I'm not saying that we get rid of mentor text or grade level text. Yes, we need to have that. And we need to have text that kids can maneuver in to build their background knowledge and the skills that are associated with it. So the other thing that Allington mentions as well in his meta-analysis is that when kids read what they understand, Allington and a lot of notable neuroscientists point to this as well, it actually triggers the gray matter in your brain. And why is that important? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. It's important because when you trigger the gray matter in your brain, that's what creates those neurological connections for deeper, critical, more metaphorical, analytical kinds of thinking. So then what does this look like? So let's take each element that Allington identified, because that is the groundwork. That is the foundation for effective literacy instruction. And how do we transition that into a virtual environment? So every child listens to a fluent adult read aloud. There are so many Web 2.0 tools, applications, et cetera, that are out there. And the teachers that I've been working with and district leaders and such, it gets overwhelming. So the ones that I'm showing, there's a lot more, but these are the ones that I picked. I used several reviews and also working in schools to really zero in on what I thought were the most effective and really built that element. So Tumble Books, I know some of you are really familiar with that. That is a great, read aloud tool. And I just found out yesterday too that they have something called the Teen Book Cloud as well. And so that's a new one. One of my all-time favorites is Storyline Online, where you have famous celebrities like the awesome Betty White who are reading classic books to kids, and it's wonderfully engaging. And the other thing that I like about it too is that there's a closed captioning feature on that as well. And then of course our former First Lady Michelle Obama just started this, I believe it was last week, and she's doing a reading along with PBS every week as well. And then a lot of principals, superintendents, teachers, to keep those relationships strong, they are doing their own read-alouds as well. And then every child reads something he or she chooses, and every child reads something he or she understands. I put those together because they're so closely related. Kids generally choose what they can handle. They generally don't choose texts that are too hard for them. I know many teachers and educators use ReadWorks. That's a great free site. The Library of Congress has an excellent collection where they pair primary source documents together. And what I like about that is that it's focused on a question or a topic, and there's different types of text. It could be a recording, it could be a primary source document, it could be a visual, any of those, and those are grouped together. And I love that site. Smithsonian does something similar, National Geographic does as well. And then I've also created a lot of differentiated text lists that I want to mention that as well. It's not just about getting texts that are differentiated. One of the things that we know about research is also length of text. We want kids to build stamina. The secret sauce is the more pages kids read, the higher the achievement. So if we keep giving kids these short works, we've almost like Googleified, using Google or just screens of those shorter texts. And they need to be longer texts to build stamina and depth of thinking. So with that, I developed, oh my gosh, I have so many of these lists, and I have them for kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and different subject areas. So there's a great essential question first, and the essential question for this exemplar for 5th grade is why is it important? Why is it important to leave your comfort zone? And so we have that great essential question. And then from there, I group text based on text complexity. And you notice that I don't just say Lexile, and that's a whole other conversation of why we just can't depend on Lexile. Just so you know, Hunger Games has the same Lexile as Captain Underpants. So I just want to, there's more to text complexity than just Lexile score. So you can see those grade level bands there on your left, and then all kinds of books that the kids can look at to go and explore that great essential question. And as I mentioned, I have them for all subject areas, the core subjects. And if you would like some of those lists, just go ahead and email me, and I'll be happy to share some of those lists with you. And I'm sure many of you have seen this graphic that when kids read an hour a day, this says 20 minutes, but if they read 60 minutes a day, they score in the 98th percentile. So one of the things that I keep saying during the pandemic is read. Just get your kids to read and be in that habit of reading and build that habit of reading. And if we do that, that is a tremendous success, educational success that we can have. And then every child talks with peers about reading and writing. And again, there's things that we can use on a virtual platform to promote dialogue and conversation. And that was something that Brandon said too. We know we really need to rely on that in a virtual environment, is that communication. Now comment is great to have like synchronous kinds of conversation. So if kids are debating or discussing or engage in a Socratic seminar, that's a really great platform. Kialo, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, kind of similar to New Comment, where you can explore ideas together. And those are geared more towards older kids, 6th through 12th grade. And then Flipgrid is usable for all grades as well, and that can be done more in an asynchronous kind of way. So kids can introduce themselves to each other. It's great for digital storytelling as well for the littles. And of course, Zoom, the platform that we're using right now. But those are just 4 ideas. And then every child writes about something personally meaningful. So again, giving kids pathways to start developing their voice in written text. So here are 4 that, just 4, because that's the other thing too, is I don't want to overwhelm colleagues. I always say, choose one and implement that in your virtual learning. And then once you feel comfortable with that, then add another one, but only one at a time. So Kid and Storybook Maker is fabulous, especially for pre-K, kindergarten, 1st grade, where kids can take themselves and pictures of themselves and make their own storybook. Write About is more academic writing for primary grades. So informational text, creating informational text or evidence-based argumentation. Think Circa is for grades 3 through 12. And for full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board for Think Circa, but that is a great platform too to teach writing, highly effective. And then Write the World is a global community of young writers. And when I was exploring that earlier this week, one of the things that all the kids are writing about is the pandemic and their firsthand experience of that. But it's real kids all over the world writing in this very public forum. So I always say, think of it as book club for writers. And then, of course, reading accurately. There are so many wordplay, phonics, vocabulary games that are available. And I put, the short list, the 5 that I really, really like. Flocabulary, I just get geeked up about Flocabulary. It's one of my all-time favorite vocabulary apps. And as Mark mentioned, I've written a bunch of books, so those are some of my titles and some of the areas that I explore. But let's remember that when we talk about reading and literacy development in an online virtual environment, we got to get back to the roots. What leads to great literacy instruction? And Allington really gave us that pathway. He gave us that keystone article. And so I always say, when I'm working with schools and districts with virtual learning, I always say, let's start with what good literacy instruction is first. That's first, not the tool. We don't take the tool to just force it in there. We take what is great instruction first to develop those skills, the background knowledge that kids need to engage in curious questions, curious inquiry. And let me just end too, where, I'm so proud to be an educator for over 3 decades. And I want to thank everybody who's online today for all that you're doing on behalf of your colleagues, your community, but most importantly, our children.
Wow, great presentation, Katie. Thanks. Our last superhero will present grading and assessment for remote learning. Let me introduce Rick Wormley.
Katie, you can hear me okay? Because you're the only one I can see. All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start and just hope that I'm not just a disembodied voice. Thank you for those of you who are held out to the very end here. And those of you who's just about to sneak out, get back here, have a seat. What I'm going to say hopefully will be pithy and pertinent and helpful to what we're doing. But I'm going to talk about something that's this huge challenge, and it involves ethics, let alone the principles of things. And it can be discussed in terms of coding in Python, or 2nd grade social studies, or 4th grade language arts, or 7th grade PE, fine and performing arts. It does not matter. What are we going to do about assessment and grading? So to get into this stuff, and yes, you can have all the slides. They'll be sent out with the recording of the video today. A reminder that we have really 3 basic concerns. The first is, do we have teachers and educational policymakers who are up to speed on ethical, accurate grading? That would be one thing right there. But the other issue, of course, is equity. So we have a variety of levels of access to technology if we do things virtually, or no access, whatsoever. We have the emotional cycles people are going through. We have maybe 1 laptop or a tablet or computer in a house with 4 or 5 kids or more, plus mom or dad needs to work from home, or mom and dad are out of work. And that has an unusual tenor and a bearing in the house. And families that were previously fairly stable are now experiencing trauma. So hunger, there might be abuse, there might be self-medicating going on. There's 1,000 different things going on, and lack of sleep and so on, where we can no longer control that learning environment like we can in the classroom. So equity is now going to be huge, and it's going to expose or exacerbate even worse systemic racism, classism. So we're going to have to address this like we have never done before. And then we've got this kind of dynamic. How do we deal with that frantic throwing it together right here, right now, and finish the year strong? And then what do we do over the summer as we sit down and think quietly when we catch our breath? What are we going to do for the year ahead? Because I'm going to suggest to you, and you probably already figured it out too, that absent a viable vaccine widely distributed, and just a reminder, the moment you have a vaccine, it still takes 2 to 4 weeks after that for it to become effective in most cases. And from studies of virology and pathology, 2 years in developing a vaccine is stunningly ambitious. So I am going to suggest that we are going to definitely be not in school. We're going to be doing virtual school all next year, or a hybrid thereof, where we have kids going every other day, or some kids going to school, but some kids at home, and we still have to meet their needs as well. So this virtual thing's going to happen. What do we do with assessment and grading, let alone in the classroom where there's unusual circumstances affecting a child's capacity to carry something forward? These are all things we keep in our mind as we try to get into the practical. What's helpful? What could we possibly do right now that would make sense of all this and help us move forward, keeping with our cause? I'm going to suggest some recommendations from the larger body of assessment and grading authors, presenters, thinkers, researchers. First, diversity. There's so much more diversity, so many variables for which we cannot control. You can see them listed here. I know I'm violating PowerPoint etiquette rules as I'm speaking, but I didn't want you to have to take notes. I wanted you to have the words right there in case you want to do redelivery back in your buildings. But there's so much diversity as outlined there, it would be unfair. Some kids will not get a fair shake to learn it, let alone a fair way to manifest that learning to be put on a permanent record, you know, a report card. So what most people are beginning to realize is our bottom line is accurate communication, not reward, not compensation, but really communicating what a child has learned as of one given calendar date. So, hold on, I'm gonna sneeze, it's gonna come up. Sorry about that. So that means that if we're out for ethics, and that means, you know, we have integrity and we want to report accurately, then what we're saying is to grade right now would constitute an ethical breach. We don't want to do that. And large universities, Harvard, Duke, MIT, so many other systems have decided to go pass-fail because they recognize how inappropriate it would be. There are still some school districts in the United States and Canada who are choosing to do a letter grade. What I'm going to suggest is you go a different direction. You make it pass-fail for the year, or they have a grade for the first 3 quarters of the year, and the last quarter is no mark, or pass-fail to some degree. And that's just literally the way it's presented. You can say, well, the grade for the year is as of March 1st, or whatever your date was when you moved into virtual learning, but it's a truncated curriculum. All colleges, all the grade levels above are understanding that at this point. Now that's binary. Totally get that, pass-fail. More and more schools who move to pass-fail realize, well, maybe we need to discern. So they start choosing things like this, proficient or a mastery, and then that middle ground, developing, approaching, progressing, and then one called no evidence presented. Now we have 3 levels. The general consensus of Tom Guskey, Ken O'Connor, and many others is this recommendation. For high school only, you have incomplete or no evidence presented. Then you have pass, and you have pass with distinction, if you so need that for weighted coursework or whatever it might be. And then for middle school and elementary, for this last quarter, all they get is descriptive feedback, commentary. Now, I do have a concern about pass with distinction if that is not calibrated as evidence across subject-like colleagues, because what's distinctive in one is not so distinctive in another. And it's not this terrible educational legend. It is absolutely true. I have witnessed this. What are we talking about? A child learns this amount, and to that teacher, it's a 4.0, but this other one, that's only a 3 or a 2, or an A versus a B or a C. And yet they have the nerve, these teachers, to tell parents and children and admissions officers, yeah, you can trust the grades. They mean what they say. They have integrity. You can't say that. One or more of you is wrong unless you calibrated the evidence with one another. And Tom Guskey, among others, has presented incredibly compelling research that it's almost physically impossible to do that. To say what is more oomph, what is exceeds expectations, what it goes above and beyond, and hold that consistently across all the teachers. So we're about communication. I'm going to suggest you say, here's the grade against the standards as very clearly identified, and here's a grade in a separate column about how you do with the advanced material, the material worthy of distinction designation. Now, 3 cautions here as you move forward. One we've already discussed, but the first one is you have to be very clear-minded on what that really means. What is evidentiary of performance at proficiency, approaching or developing, what's emergent, and then of course calibrate that with each other. Every child and every parent should have a very clear understanding. How do I go from a 1 to a 2, a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4? And there are a lot of teachers who've never really developed that skill set, and it can make you vulnerable to your colleagues. It's scary. I lay my cards on the table and say this is important about marine biomes. And you think, no, it's just one more biome to memorize. We don't need that. And we have that argument. Well, if I'm a 3-year veteran and you're a 30-year veteran, it's kind of hard for me to kind of talk back and confront you with that. But it needs to happen if you want grades to have integrity. Second warning here, we just discussed. If they do go above and beyond, be very careful that you have a separate place to report that if at all possible. And you've been very good at making the implicit explicit. No guess what's on the teacher's mind activities. The last caution, it's got a little thought bubble with it. What does this mean for us? What are we talking about? In this day and age, with distance learning, again, thrown together, we're not as efficient or finessed in it as we will one day be, I hope. But right here, right now, we find that learning happens in a much slower amount and it's episodic, it's done in bursts. One child is having a very tough week emotionally, or access has been off, or they have to do more and more shopping, or they're caring for a dying or at least very sick relative or friend, or whatever is going on. So they didn't get something done on the timeline you imposed. Remember, those timelines are incredibly arbitrary. We're just making it up. So this idea that they all have to be in the conveyor belt at the same time goes right out the window. So if I get a child who does something at home, then presents it days after it was due, I can still take that and look at that as evidence. So any grade we give something must be considered temporary at best. Given subsequent evidence down the road, we might raise or lower that grade. That means it's actually worthwhile to put previous curriculum on subsequent tests, because the testimony for a teacher, let alone for a grade, is what a child carries forward in the long run and can do independent of all assistance. Not what they learned right here, right now, took a test quickly and then completely forgot it over time. We teach so that kids learn, not to play gotcha. But a lot of teachers enter into assessment and grading as a gotcha enterprise. I have presented all the material, and I'm showing you how I document how you fall short, and presenting that to all the stakeholders in your life. Come back tomorrow for more of the same rejection. It'll be fun. That's not teaching. Every one of us was hired to teach so that students learn, whatever it takes. And that's the pragmatist credo. We are pragmatists at our core if we're effective teachers. We do whatever it takes, even if it's out of our comfort zone. I may not know a piece of poetry. I may not know how to write poetry, but man, I write poetry. And that includes hip hop and rap. And yeah, anything you want to bring in with Hamilton is fine. But it includes all that category in a science class, a math class, a PE program, a coding class. It doesn't matter what I teach, because students creating poetry for real and accurate content, they'll learn it greater than almost anything else I could do. So it's about their success. I don't teach the way I learned, I teach the way they learn. So I need to be open to that, vigilant, attentive to the way they learn, and incorporate that in my instructional design, let alone in my assessments. Now, as we kind of move forward in this, let's have a clear distinction. Assessment can be very equitable. It's fine. Assessment from assidere in the Latin, right? To sit beside. It's a coaching tool. That means it's oxygen. It brings life. It's vital to what we do. You can't have good assessment without good instruction, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. They're inseparable there. So I can have different techniques. I can do it informally and formally. And it's very recoverable. You see, in most assessment that is ongoing, I'm going to get critique. I'm going to get some kind of feedback, and they'd be allowed to revise in light of that and be stronger next time. Revise my performance and be accredited and assessed anew. There's hope. It's low stakes, but high feedback. And my teacher's going to spend focused attention on helping me do the assessment. So now it's active, not passive. Not going to have students who are overly reliant on external validation to find personal value. I'm not going to have students who develop this sense of learned helplessness. They're going to own their learning, because what are we about? Self-efficacy. You are in charge of your learning, and by golly, let me give you the tools to rise. Now, grading, this is the report of what we know and can do at journey's end. The evidence presented as of one arbitrary calendar date imposed on the next generation. That's it. So with grades, it's rare that we do it. It's not required for learning. Limited choice of procedures if you have more traditional systems. It's very high stakes because it's going to go on a report card, and it tends not to be unrecoverable in more traditional systems. Okay, so let's put this two separate ways. Assessment is legitimate. It's a part of, I shall share the path with you. I will walk with you as you do this. And you can be equitable in a wide variety of timelines and formats for assessing. There are 24 ways to assess that exact same thing that you're only thinking there's only 1 or 2 ways. So we don't want to let our creativity and intellect atrophy, which could happen if we've been teaching the same thing year after year after year. So we might need to explore some other people. What are a variety of ways we could assess and not limit kids to this one thing where the format might get in the way of an accurate portrayal of what a child knows. Put another way, we want to get rid of the grading. We might want to look at it like this. We can learn without grades. They can get in the way, but we can't learn without feedback and assessment. Let's be mindful of that and emphasize the feedback along the way. Now, 3 cautions with this approach. Consider the teacher's going, all right, I'm going to make this assignment. We're going to do these lessons, and I'm going to do an assessment. Oh, wait, that's going to be really hard to grade, so I'm not going to do it. No, you don't want to do that. I mean, seriously, what's that sound? Who's making that noise? Was it you? Oh, sorry, couldn't help overhear the conversation. Are you saying that teachers assign stuff to us, but they may not know exactly how to grade it? Yes, I am saying that. We're still figuring that out. So bear with us, maybe work with us, give us some ideas. We would like that. Well, that means what I'm trying to get across is that you are principled first, practical second. What it means is you look at your instructional design. What do I know from cognitive science for the students at this age group I serve that would be the most effective lesson ever created on planet Earth? No pressure there. And I do that thing. I don't think about the ultimate gradability of something in terms of how I design the effective instruction. I will find a way to do that. So if I do a very intense hands-on thing, you're like, how do I grade something like that? You would still do this. What are you trying to teach? What are the standards? And you'd say them. Good. What evidence would you tolerate? They'll be indicative of proficiency. Good, good. Now let's see if we can find where that is in this very complex project. That's one of the cautions. Effective instructional design, not ultimate gradability. Second, lean towards asynchronous learning. Families are just all over the place with the cycles and access. Don't forget, it's the emotional cycle, not just everything else. Resources, sleep, support, all those things. If you're going to do a synchronous thing because you want to build community, that's awesome, man. Do it. But what we're suggesting is this. Any content, any observations you make during that time can't be used in that permanent grade report. It's a way to build a community. What has to happen if you want to be equitable is you focus on the asynchronous. Another question? Yes, of course. It does make it easier for you and your brothers to get all the learning done and get the work back to the teacher. The last of these 3 is that you're going to have to realize we have learning loss. Schools will probably need to extend into the summer or do a mandated summer school, or quite better than that. Next year's teachers are going to have to be intimate with this year's curriculum, particularly the last half, and teach it with theirs. You can't physically do it with curriculum overload. So I'm going to suggest you get real adult about it, because a lot of us have had to do the heavy lifting, and you say, what are the 4 to 8 most leveraging standards of all? For these we will fight in any one discipline. That tends to be what it is in a school year. What are many of the secondary things we're going to teach? And then what are we just going to let it go, Elsa? Let it go. And then we're going to weave in those really important leveraging principles from the previous year. If we continue and have a whole full year ahead of us where we're doing virtual, there will be even more curriculum loss. And I'm going to suggest it's going to take 2 and 3 years or more to kind of recover back some of the curriculum we lost, if we even think it's still viably important in what we do. Now, because we're a little bit short, oh, yes, what was this last interruption? Don't mess around, give us the stuff that will matter. Yeah, okay, I agree with you. Give us the stuff that will matter in the long run. We'll make you that promise. So, do you have one of these in your high school? Maybe one in middle school, talking about elementary? One in elementary, talking about the gene pool from which the child comes? Yeah, we got a lot of people who are like, well, that might work in middle school, but not high school. Or they might work with the math teachers, but never the English teachers. Let me tell you, these things work with all subjects. I do the exact same program for transitional kindergarten, preschool, first grade that I do for college professors and everybody in between. They are that universal, so much so, you should not even be reading my stuff or hiring me or anybody else who talks about it unless it was that viable. I guarantee it works in math just as well as it works in French class or coding or drill team or whatever it might be. there's a lot of myopia. I have my own little emotional baggage about this one thing we want to avoid. And then you might have this. We can't do it here at this lower level because upper level above us doesn't do that. And one of the things you can't do is a false assumption is that you must recreate the policies and practices level above you in this lower level where you're really teaching as the best way to prepare them for the upper level. Guys, ladies, we do not give car keys to a toddler because one day she'll drive. The most preparatory thing for above is not incompetence. The most preparatory thing is twofold. Really learning the stuff, that's competence, and personal maturity. And that happens with standards-based, criterion reference, evidence-based grading way more often. So what I want to do to remind you, is there's an article on that on my website. If you're curious, rickwormley.com, you're welcome to go there and grab that, is I want you to realize that absent a moral imperative, nothing's going to change. I'm going to invite you to lean into each other and go, is this the moral thing we do? It's probably a better question, best question probably of the whole committee meeting that somebody had. So is it moral? If I gave you bar graphs and correlation causation, it wouldn't change much. Abstract intellectual idea. But if I gave you logic, reasoning, research, and we brought in ethics and this idea that we are a moral enterprise, suddenly people are willing to be candid with the one in the mirror. So what are some of the things we don't have time to kind of get through? Is a reminder that we're going to be principle first, practical second, not just look at grading presentations and books out there as recipes for our grading cookbook. You're going to be principled and thoughtful in it. What I have listed for you, and again, you can get the slides for this, is I want to bring it to a close. As I gave you principles of assessment and grading that are ethical and lead to accurate grading, that still hold up. These things aren't tossed to one side because we're grading online. You can still do all of these. You can still go to Universal Design for Learning, get ideas on how to find multiple ways to present, to engage, but also to assess at the end. All these different principles are there, not conflating the report of one thing with something else. So this is a report of your homework completion, but it's a completely different statement than the report of what you know about parts of a plant. If I try to mix them together, it knowingly falsifies the report for each one individually, which is a form of distorting the truth. That's a form of lying. And none of us have moral authority to lie to our children. So what are you going to do to maintain ethics, but also modern pedagogical practice? I gave you several slides, these principles. I am trying to honor your time and bring this to a close. But at the end of this, you will see some people wonder about cheating, about copying at home. How do I know the student's work is their own work? Yeah, so I did an entire article on this. I also do presentations on this. And so you can go to the article right now and get lots of good practical ideas. But if you want to talk further about that, because it is a really big concern, I would love to do that with you. And then definitely challenging unified field theory for that accounts for gravity. Yeah, getting away from our cell phones, and then finding toilet paper of some sort. But I would also say, more pertinent to what we're discussing, these are very, very challenging things that we need to address when it comes to assessment and grading. We want to acknowledge they're here and start working on them. And then you might be wanting some practical tips. Here they are on Twitter, and then the website's down below for those research and practical tips on how to do this. And then I couldn't leave you, Illinois, oh my gosh, what a great handbook for how to handle grading and assessment here at the end of the year. But I wanted to give you the books that are go-to. If you're into social justice and equity, you'll get Joe Feldman's Grading for Equity. You got Standards-Based Classroom. On the left side, all the research for the past 100 years. On the right, this is for special ed students and how you might grade them. On the left, motivation. On the right, the go-to for so many people for how to get started with grading and take care of the nitty-gritty. The one on the right is my book, Fairness and Noise Equals second edition, which is what this has been based on. But the one on the left, really good assessment ideas, not just processing information ideas, summarization. I also wrote that with Deidre Stafford. And these just came out. I am so excited to read them. I highly recommend them to you. I'm about halfway through all three. And as they say in the finer cultural events of our lives, that's all, folks. I'll turn it back over to Mark Kestel and AEI speakers.
Wow, great presentation. Thanks, Rick. And thank you all for attending the Education Avengers, Champions of Virtual Learning, Chapter 1. Please join us again on Thursday, May 14th, for Chapter 2 of our continuing series.
Bye, everybody.